going to John Perkins, a former chief economist with a major, he's advised the former chief economist of the World Bank. He's worked at the highest levels. I'm not going to try to go over his whole bio. Most of you know who he is. He's written Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's also written The Secret History of the American Empire and Hoodwinked, Blueprint for a New Form of Global Economics. And he joins us now. I've been on in about 6-8 months with all the big developments that are taking place. John, great having you. I've got so many questions, but for you right now, what is most important front and center for you, somebody who's been on the inside of this, what the controlled implosion of Europe, Goldman Sachs capturing Europe when Hitler and Mussolini and Napoleon couldn't? What is most important on your radar screen right now, John Perkins?
Well, Alex, I think all of that's important. I just came back from Istanbul. I'm headed off to England and Ireland and Iceland, and I'm traveling around a lot and heading around the United States, speaking very many different places. And what I'm really struck by is how we're waking up, and shows like yours are really making that happen. And we're seeing, there's the Occupy movement. People are waking up. But we're seeing, I saw in Istanbul, I see in the Middle East, I see in China, we're seeing in Russia with people standing up to Putin. We're seeing it around the world today that people really are waking up. And some of it isn't leading anywhere. It's just people out on the streets, demonstrating and talking. But to me, it's a good sign that shows like this one are getting through to people. They're really beginning to wake up. And despite the way that the corporatocracy is digging in, we know that we're waking up. And the fact that they're digging in so strongly also indicates to us that they know that we're waking up and we're beginning to win. And so my hat's off to you and all the others that are out there spreading this word, because the tide's turning.
Well, I agree with you. And again, they tried to co-opt and take over the Occupy movement that was speaking out against corruption in Wall Street as being the heart of the problem, not just here but worldwide. That's where the much of the main system of the monster resides, not just its tentacles. But when they couldn't co-opt it and just turn it into a call for higher taxes, the Obama administration had simultaneous raids in 30-plus cities, arrest the people. So they're failing to co-opt the Tea Party. They're failing to co-opt the Occupy movement. What do you see from being on the inside of this? Describe what an economic hitman is, because we haven't done that in a while, and what we see happening in Europe, what we see unfolding right now.
Well, we see all these countries being hit. I was just on a program yesterday in Ireland, and Ireland's got hit very hard by economic hitmen. Italy, Greece, Portugal, Iceland. And the United States. I've been talking to a group of people here in the United States who took credit cards that said that they could have interest at 3% is all they'd have to pay in their interest. But the fine prints and many of them, I've talked to this whole group of people that are now trying to file a class action suit because they took out loans. They used these loans to finance down payments on houses and many other things that they thought it was at 3%. The very, very fine print, and even lawyers didn't see this, said that you could set it up so that your payments would be paid every 30 days or every 35 days, let's say, and automatically, and therefore you'd never have to pay more than 3%. If you didn't set it up that way, if you didn't pay within those 35 days, your interest payments would go up to 30%. What people didn't read, what they didn't see in this extremely fine print, was that the banks had the right to go from 35 days to 30 days arbitrarily. And so all these people suddenly found that they hadn't made their payment on time because the time frame had changed from 35 to 30 days. And so suddenly they're being hit by 30% interest rates on these loans. There's nothing they can do about it. These big banks doing this. And it's that same process. It's similar to what we did on a much larger scale to the developing world back in the 70s when I was an economic hitman. It's what's happened in Ireland. It's what's happened in Italy and in Greece. It's happening here at home to our own people. And but the point is, people are beginning to see through the veneer. They're beginning to see that our country, in fact, the world economy, has been stolen by a bunch of robber barons. And it's time for us to take it back.
Expanding on what you did so people can understand from an inside perspective on what these mega banks are doing, how they operate, how they take over countries, including ours. Because understanding that is a way to reverse engineer it and extricate ourselves from this. I mean, describe what you cover in your best-selling book, Economic Hitman, Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Okay, Alex, so what I did specifically was identify countries that had resources that corporations covet, like oil, for example, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of the other big banking organizations. But the money would never actually go to the country. Instead, it would go to our own corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country, huge projects like big power plants, hydroelectric plants, and transmission lines and distribution stations and multi-industrial parks, things that would benefit a few wealthy families in those countries, as well as our own corporations that built them, but wouldn't help the majority of the people who don't have enough money to buy much electricity, can't get jobs in industrial parks because they don't hire many people, and yet the people of the country would be left holding this huge debt that they couldn't repay. So at some point we go back in and say, hey, since you can't pay your debts, essentially give us your resources, your oil or whatever. Sell it to us at a very low price without any environmental or social regulations, without having to take care of the people in the country that we're exploiting, or allow us to build a military base on your soil or vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote. And in a few cases where we couldn't convince presidents to take on those deals, which were really bad for their countries, the jackals step in and they either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And you know, I talk about my own personal experience in Ecuador with the president there, Jaime Roldos, democratically elected president, Omar Torrijos of Panama. They didn't buy into these deals. They had a lot of integrity, and both of them were, and they wouldn't listen to me. They wouldn't buy my deal, and so both of them were assassinated.
Now, when they don't do the deal, the jackals come in. What do the jackals do?
Well, either overthrow the governments, that we just saw this happen in Honduras with President Zelaya about 2 years ago, or they, and we've seen it, of course, happen with Allende in Chile and Arbenz in Guatemala and so on and so forth, or they assassinate the leaders, which we saw in my case with Jaime Roldos of Ecuador and Omar Torrijos of Panama. So they're either overthrown, and if they go kind of peacefully and they leave the country like Zelaya did in Honduras, okay. If they're not going to go peacefully, then they're taken out.
Looking at Europe, you know, I remember when we first talked 6 years ago or so, or I guess longer, we were talking about how the bankers were now going to do the same stuff to us in Europe, in the United States, in England. I've seen some of the top Irish reporters bring up to the European Central Bank in press conferences, hey, most of this debt, over 90%, isn't even ours. You got our government to sign on to your derivatives, and then you lecture terms to us when you loan us money back. This is crazy. And the ECB people, just in these videos, I intended to play one today, but it's up on Infowars.com, they just laugh at them. I mean, it's such a con job how these bankers do this. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, that's exactly it, Alex. It's a loaded gun. It's a con job. It's a scam. And what I described earlier that's going on in the United States with these credit card loans is exactly the same thing, that the banks are screwing their own customers big time. And it appears to be illegal what they're doing, because there's this fine print on the contracts that says if you don't, that they have the right to just arbitrarily change the time frame from 35 days to 30 days, for example. And, you know, we've seen this over and over. We've seen it here in the United States when a few years ago all the bankers were telling people who could only afford a $300,000 house, well, buy the $500,000 house, tighten your belt for a few years, and then it'll be worth $1 million. Just go ahead and do it. We know you can do it. We will approve this loan. And then, of course, the bottom falls out of the market. The house is now only worth $100,000, and the people still have a loan out for $500,000. They can't pay it. The house is foreclosed on. The banks repackage the whole deal and sell it to someone else. It's pure robbery. There's no question about it. And it's time we really stood up to it. And I think people are beginning to stand up to it.
What did you make of 2 or 3 weeks ago when that high-level Goldman Sachs exec quit and said, you know, we try to rip off our clients, we make fun of them, we call them idiots, we call them Muppets, and I just can't be part of this culture anymore. And then now we learn Goldman Sachs has sex slave funds, and, you know, Mitt Romney's wife is invested in it.
Yeah, well, I think that guy, you know, really hit the nail on the head. he opened a Pandora's box, and there's going to be a lot more coming out. I was grateful that he had done that. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that coming down the line.
John, why do you think what we've seen, I know you've talked about this, record globally, central bankers, not your local banker that helps the economy, but these, these finance capital crony people, these insiders, these money changers, I guess you could call them, they're resigning in droves and running off to the third world or to remote areas. Why is that?
I think they're scared. They see this coming down the tube, that people are waking up. There's going to be a bloodbath. I hope there's going to be a bloodbath, and I think they're expecting that to happen too. So take the money and run. I mean, they can take their millions and live like kings in many parts of the third world.
Remember a few years ago when it turned out that Goldman Sachs was like buying all these weapons at their offices and like having weapons caches at their offices, and they said it's for the public. I mean, wow, when people are in business as a company buying guns to protect themselves from people with pitchforks and torches, I mean, that they know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, they sort of saw the Occupy movement coming, and it hasn't come nearly as strongly, I think, as a lot of people expected it to. But it's been pretty ruthlessly put down in many places. We're in a very, very interesting world, Alex, and this is a time that's been prophesized by indigenous cultures around the world as a time of shaking up, of turmoil, and a time when people are going to wake up more, and we really are waking up. And we have to expect that there's going to be a pushback by the status quo. They're going to do everything they can to stop this turnaround from happening.
Well said. Just briefly, the Coney 2012 people, we just learned, have released their big part 2, and I'm attacked in it for pointing out that this was being used by the State Department to try to launch wars in Africa. And the same thing's happening in Uganda, in the past as is happening now. I'm not saying the Lord's Resistance Army is good. They haven't been seen in years. There's these calls to go into Sudan and start a war. And my point is they get these well-meaning people involved thinking backing military intervention is for the good. But I never see the State Department get behind something, John, for the good generally. It's always for special interest. But they'll use the left now. I'm seeing some of the left call for war as if it's humanitarian.
Yeah, we're seeing that in Mali, too. But, the threat of war is good for business. Unfortunately, our economy is to a very large degree based on the military. And I can't believe that anybody really wants us to go to another war with Iran. I mean, my God, Iran can close down the Straits of Hormuz and shut off more than 20% of the world's oil supplies. We don't want war with them, and I don't think most of the big industries do either. But they want the threat of war. Because as long as you've got that threat of war hanging over you, everybody's buying weapons and security.
Well, what about Libya? I mean, I'm not a fan of Gaddafi, but he was a stabilizer. He'd come in out of the cold. They've put al-Qaeda in charge now.
Yeah, well, we remember that Gaddafi, was opposed to the dollar, to the central bank, the Federal Reserve, our central bank. And he was threatening to create a new exchange for oil that would not be paid for in dollars, but would be paid for in what he called the gold dinar. He had a pretty big gold supply.
Stay there. I want to hear about why they went after him for that. Final segment with John Perkins, author of Hoodwinked, and, of course, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Amazing person. We'll also give you his website. When we come back, I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com. And, of course, we're also streaming video. You keep hearing me talking about video at prisonplanet.tv. On the front page of Infowars.com, the war on prosperity is calling you. Enlist in the IRS. Incredible graphic. Bill allows IRS to deny Americans right to travel, and it looks like it's going to pass. It's passed the Senate. It's now going to the House. I mean, let me tell you, this has always been the plan. Arizona law, hot on the trail of Obama's documents. Ron Paul continues to draw huge crowds, but media blackout. More furious, U.S. soldiers trafficked arms, drugs to DEA agents. That's at Infowars.com. Sarkozy arrests dozens of Islamicists in raids before election to look tough. They staged that whole deal, folks. After huge ammo buy, DHS purchases bulletproof resistant booths for highway checkpoints. We've got a big article coming out about this professor saying if you question man-made climate change and paying Al Gore money, basically, you should be put in a mental ward. Now we found more of her writings. End democracy. Okay, that article's coming out. See how fast they pull that off there. John Perkins, whose website is johnperkins.org. You can sign up there and get his free newsletter at johnperkins.org. You can also sign up at Infowars.com, halfway down to our free newsletter. John, finish up with Gaddafi, because that's a good model. I mean, love him or hate him, he was actually building up Africa, and he was not playing ball with the banker boys.
He certainly was not playing ball with the banker boys. He made the same mistake, if you want to call it that, as Saddam Hussein, and the Iranians are poising for the same thing today, and that is to say, you know, I'm going to bring the dollar down. Basically, he said, you know, there's no reason why we can only trade oil for U.S. dollars. And he was recommending that African nations and other Muslim and Middle East nations buy oil and sell oil for the gold dinar, which was a currency that he basically created. He had a huge gold supply to back it up in his own country. And now we don't take kindly to any infringement upon the Federal Reserve or the U.S. dollar. And I think, frankly, that's the big reason why we went after him when we did.
And, you know, I always say that, too. But, I mean, you're saying it. We say we. And I guess it is we, because we let our government turn into this with corporations. But more and more, they just ignore the people's will. The American people don't like what's happening. I mean, Congress has a 9% approval rating. I think we just need to recognize this government and these corporations do not have our best interest at heart and really are the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It isn't really we, it's they. But we are part of it, and we've got to turn it around. We've got to realize, though, that the government really isn't all that important. The government's run by the big corporations. But ultimately, we do have control over these corporations. You know, we got rid of apartheid in South Africa back when I was in college by boycotting companies that supported it. We get corporations to clean up terribly polluted rivers in this country and open their doors wider to women and minorities. We do have a lot of power over this if we just exercise it. We have to do it, though. We have to demand that these corporations turn things around, or we won't buy from them. We won't support them.
What do you think of how they're trying to rebrand war now under left cover, because it's been discredited under the right, where, oh, we're going to aid Syria, the rebels, and they're calling them protesters when they're arming people to try to overthrow them?
Yeah, well, it's just another misuse of words, and we hear that all the time. It's always there for war and dictators, support dictators. You know, it was shocking to me that when Mubarak fell in Egypt, that a huge percentage of the American people thought he was a democratically elected president. He'd been a totalitarian dictator backed up by our CIA for decades.
Absolutely. John Perkins, thank you for the time today.
My pleasure, Alex. Keep up your good work.
Thank you, sir. The one area that I didn't properly cover today is really big right now. We covered it days ago, but now it's blown up. Obama said, hey, forget Congress. I'll launch wars if I want to. You know, go to Hades. But now he said to the Supreme Court, because the word is they're going to rule against his plan. And so he said, oh, they don't count. You know, I can do whatever I want. This has turned into a big deal and is really flipping people out right now. Now, this may be a ruse where they're really going to rule for it. Who knows? But we'll cover it tonight on the Nightly News, 7 o'clock, prisonplanet.tv. You don't need me to tell you that humanity is in a deep crisis. Everyone can feel it. We know a tectonic struggle is now taking place between the forces of freedom and those who love darkness, bondage, and enslavement. Yes, my friends, evil is rising. But take heart. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Recently, New World Order operative Hillary Clinton admitted they're losing the info war.
We are in an information war, and we are losing that war.
The globalists are scared. They've overreached. The future of the info war is in your hands. Join prisonplanet.tv. Download the thousands of special video reports, ebooks, and more, and get them out to everyone you know. Continue to spread the word about the broadcast on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and every other globalist propaganda platform. We are going to use their system against them. The info war now goes into high gear. Going to John Perkins, a former chief economist with a major, he's advised the former chief economist of the World Bank. He's worked at the highest levels. I'm not going to try to go over his whole bio. Most of you know who he is. He's written Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's also written The Secret History of the American Empire and Hoodwinked, Blueprint for a New Form of Global Economic. Much of the main system of the monster resides, not just its tentacles, but when they couldn't co-opt it and just turn it into a call for higher taxes, the Obama administration had simultaneous raids in 30-plus cities, arrest the people. So they're failing to co-opt the Tea Party. They're failing to co-opt the Occupy movement. What do you see from being on the inside of this? Describe what an economic hitman is, because we haven't done that in a while, and what we see happening in Europe, what we see unfolding right now.
Well, we see all these countries being hit. I was just on a program yesterday in Ireland, and I'm traveling around a lot and heading around the United States, speaking very many different places. And what I'm really struck by is how we're waking up, and shows like yours are really making that happen. And we're seeing, there's the Occupy movement. People are waking up. But we're seeing I saw in Istanbul. I see in the Middle East. I see in China. We're seeing in Russia with people standing up to Putin. We're seeing it around the world today that people really are waking up. And some of it isn't leading anywhere. It's just people out on the streets, demonstrating and talking. But to me, it's a good sign that shows like this one are getting through to people. They're really beginning to wake up. And despite the way that the corporatocracy is digging in, we know that we're waking up. And the fact that they're digging in so strongly also indicates to us that they know that we're waking up and we're beginning to win. And so my hat's off to you and all the others that are out there spreading this word, because the tide's turning.
Well, I agree with you. And again, they tried to co-opt and take over the Occupy movement that was speaking out against corruption in Wall Street as being the heart of the problem, not just here but worldwide. That's where the economics. And he joins us now. I'd been on in about 6-8 months with all the big developments that are taking place. John, great having you. I've got so many questions, but for you right now, what is most important front and center for you, somebody who's been on the inside of this, what the controlled implosion of Europe, Goldman Sachs capturing Europe when Hitler and Mussolini and Napoleon couldn't? What is most important on your radar screen right now, John Perkins?
Well, Alex, I think all of that's important. I just came back from Istanbul. I'm headed off to England and Ireland and Iceland.